Most people don't fail because their goals are too big. They fail because their systems are too small. A goal without a system is just a wish dressed up as ambition. Stop asking if you're motivated. Start asking if your system makes motivation unnecessary. When people set goals, they usually do it with excitement, with a burst of energy and belief that this time it will be different. They write it down, they imagine the finish line, they can already see themselves standing at the top of the mountain celebrating. And for a few days, sometimes even a few weeks, that excitement carries them forward, but then life shows up. The distractions creep in, the motivation wears off, the schedule becomes messy, and slowly, quietly, the goal begins to fade. The problem is not the ambition. The problem is not the dream. The problem is that most people confuse having a goal with having a plan to get there. A goal without a system is like trying to drive across a country with no map, no GPS, and no gas stations along the way. You might know where you want to end up, but you don't have the infrastructure to get you there. The truth is that goals, by themselves, are fragile. They are dependent on mood, on bursts of energy, on willpower. And willpower is a limited resource. It's like trying to hold your breath underwater. You can do it for a while, but eventually you'll gasp for air. Systems, on the other hand, don't rely on motivation. They are built into the rhythm of your life. They make progress automatic rather than optional. Think about a student who says, "I want to get straight A's this semester." That's a goal. Now think about a student who sets a system, studying for 1 hour every evening, reviewing notes after every lecture, asking questions after every class. The first student has hope, the second has a method. One is gambling on effort, the other is engineering results. Most of us fail not because our goals are unrealistic, but because our systems don't exist. People say, "I want to lose weight," but then they keep the same grocery habits, the same late night snacking, the same irregular workouts. They set a goal to write a book, but their daily system doesn't include time for writing, research, or reflection. They want to build wealth, but they don't create a budgeting or saving system that makes it possible. The missing link is not desire. The missing link is structure. Without a system, even the most passionate goal is just a wish dressed up in pretty words. Another reason goals fail without systems is because goals focus on the finish line. When you obsess over the end result, you create a gap between where you are and where you want to be, and that gap feels heavy. Every day you don't have the result, you are reminded that you're not there yet. This is why people quit. They look at the mountain and it feels overwhelming. Systems, however, shift the focus from the mountain peak to the next step on the trail. When the system is in place, you don't wake up asking, "How far am I from the top?" You simply ask, "What step am I taking today?" This small shift changes everything because progress starts to feel achievable, controllable, and less intimidating. Think about an athlete training for a championship. If they only focus on winning the trophy, the weight of that desire will crush them. But if their system is about showing up to practice, improving their form, sticking to nutrition, and following a training plan, the trophy becomes a byproduct of their system. The system makes winning inevitable. The same principle applies in everyday life. You don't become healthy by wanting to. You don't become wealthy by wishing for it. You don't become skilled by imagining yourself as an expert. You become these things by creating systems that make the habits automatic. Goals also fail because they are too often tied to external validation. People set goals like, "I want to be promoted by the end of the year," or "I want to have 1 million followers." But these outcomes depend on factors outside of their control: the company's decisions, the algorithm, other people's opinions. Systems bring the focus back to what you can control. Instead of saying, "I want a promotion," you build a system of consistent learning, taking initiative, building relationships, and delivering results. Instead of saying, "I want 1 million followers," you create a system of posting valuable content consistently, engaging with your audience, and improving your craft. The system grounds you in actions that are yours to manage, regardless of the outcome. There's also the illusion of achievement that comes with goal setting. Writing down a goal can feel powerful, but it tricks the brain into thinking progress has been made. It creates a temporary high, a sense that because you've declared it, you're already on the path, but this illusion is dangerous. It gives you the satisfaction of accomplishment without the actual work. Systems strip away that illusion. Systems are not glamorous. They're repetitive, unexciting, and often invisible to others. Nobody cheers when you wake up early to read, or when you choose a healthier meal, or when you practice your craft in private. But these are the quiet victories that accumulate, and eventually they become undeniable. The irony is that people who obsess over goals often end up discouraged, while people who commit to systems often surpass their goals without even realizing it. Because the system is not about the finish line, it's about creating a lifestyle where the finish line becomes inevitable. The runner who builds a daily system of training doesn't just finish a marathon, they become a runner for life. The writer who builds a system of writing doesn't just finish a book, they create a body of work. The entrepreneur who builds a system of learning, testing, and refining doesn't just launch a business, they build the capacity to launch many. If you look at the people who consistently achieve their goals, it's never because they had a stronger vision than everyone else. It's because they had stronger systems. They understood that a goal is a compass, but a system is the road. The compass shows you the direction, but it's the road that actually carries you there. And most people never reach their goals because they spend their lives staring at the compass without ever building the road beneath their feet. When most people set goals, their minds are fixed on the outcome. They imagine the picture of success, the ideal version of themselves at the finish line, holding the trophy, celebrating the achievement, proving to the world that they made it. Outcome thinking is seductive because it paints a vivid picture of the future. It feels inspiring to visualize yourself in that desired state. But the danger of outcome thinking is that it creates a constant tension between where you are and where you want to be. Every day you don't have the result, you feel like you are failing. The distance between your current reality and your desired reality becomes a source of frustration, and over time, that frustration eats away at your motivation. Process thinking, on the other hand, doesn't ask you to obsess about the future. It brings your focus back to the present moment, to the actions and routines that shape who you are becoming. Instead of asking, "What do I want to achieve?" process thinking asks, "What kind of daily system can I build that naturally leads me there?" The difference may seem small, but the shift is massive. Because when you think in terms of process, you stop measuring your success by the finish line and start measuring it by your ability to keep walking the path. That shift makes progress sustainable. Imagine two people training for a marathon. The first person wakes up every morning thinking, "I have to run 2 miles, that's the finish line, that's what this is all about." Every run feels like a test. Every bad day feels like evidence that they're not good enough. The second person thinks differently. Their mindset is, "Today, I need to complete my training schedule. Today, I need to run 5 miles. They are not focused on the marathon itself. They are focused on the process of running consistently, of building endurance one step at a time. When race day arrives, the first person is mentally drained because they've been carrying the weight of the outcome the whole time. The second person is ready because they've been living inside the process, and the process prepared them. The truth is, goals are a moment in time, but systems and processes are a lifestyle. If someone says, "I want to lose 20 pounds," that's an outcome. If they achieve it but go back to their old habits, the weight will return. That's the trap of outcome thinking. It ends at the finish line. But if they say, "I want to eat in a way that fuels my body, I want to move daily, I want to create a lifestyle that supports health," then it's not about hitting a number on a scale, it's about who they are becoming every single day. The weight loss is inevitable, but more importantly, it's sustainable because the process doesn't end. Outcome thinking is often tied to identity in unhealthy ways. People say, "When I achieve this, then I'll be successful. When I reach that goal, then I'll feel confident." But what happens if the outcome takes longer than expected? What happens if circumstances change and the goal is delayed? The identity you've tied to that outcome crumbles. Process thinking protects you from that fragility. Because instead of saying, "I'll be confident when I lose the weight," you say, "I am confident because I am disciplined enough to stick to my process." Instead of saying, "I'll be successful when I hit $1 million in revenue," you say, "I am successful because I consistently show up, build, and learn." The process becomes your source of confidence, not the uncertain outcome. Another reason outcome thinking is dangerous is because it breeds impatience. When you only care about the finish line, you feel pressure to get there as quickly as possible. You start looking for shortcuts, quick fixes, and hacks. You see this everywhere. People buying into fad diets, overnight success schemes, instant wealth promises. And yet, these shortcuts rarely last. Process thinking demands patience because it's not about how quickly you can get there, but how consistently you can show up. And ironically, the people who embrace process thinking usually get to their goals faster, because they stop wasting energy chasing shortcuts and instead put their energy into the daily actions that compound. Think about someone who wants to learn a new language. Outcome thinking sounds like, "I need to be fluent in 6 months." They push themselves, feel frustrated when progress is slow, and often quit because they don't meet the deadline. Process thinking sounds like, "I will practice 30 minutes every day, I will immerse myself in conversations, I will keep improving." 6 months later, the process-driven learner might not be perfectly fluent, but they are far more advanced, more consistent, and more confident. And if they keep going, fluency will be inevitable. The shift from outcome to process is not just about results, it's about experience. Outcome thinking makes the journey feel like a grind because every step is judged against the end. Process thinking makes the journey fulfilling because every step is a win in itself. You stop asking, "Am I there yet?" and start saying, "I am already on the path, and that matters." This changes the way you see discipline. Discipline no longer feels like punishment. It feels like freedom because the process you've built gives you control over your growth. Even in business, the most successful companies don't survive because they had one brilliant goal. They survive because they built systems for innovation, systems for customer service, systems for training employees, systems for adapting to change. Their success is not a one-time event. It is the byproduct of the processes they created. And that principle applies to individuals just as much as it does to organizations. Process thinking is about ownership. You can't always control the outcome. You can't control whether your boss gives you the promotion, or whether your startup gets acquired, or whether the world rewards your effort in the exact way you imagined. But you can control the process you live by every day. You can control your learning, your habits, your consistency, your resilience. And over time, the process creates the outcome anyway. When you stop obsessing about outcomes and start designing processes, something powerful happens. You begin to trust the path. You don't need to constantly measure yourself against a finish line. You simply need to ask, did I live my process today? And if the answer is yes, then you are already winning. One of the biggest mistakes people make when they build systems is that they copy what others are doing. They see a successful entrepreneur waking up at 4 a.m. and think, if I do that, I'll be successful too. They see an athlete training 6 hours a day and think, if I copy that routine, I'll get their results. But systems are not one size fits all. A system is not just about discipline, it's about alignment. A system that works for one person can completely break another if it doesn't match their identity, their values, and their way of living. To build a system that actually works, it must feel like an extension of who you are, not a costume you wear temporarily. Identity sits at the core of consistency. When a system reflects the kind of person you believe yourself to be, it becomes natural. It doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel like a punishment. It feels like an affirmation of who you are becoming. Take the difference between someone who says, I'm trying to quit smoking, and someone who says, I'm not a smoker. The first person is battling against their current identity every single day. The second person is living out a new identity, the system they build, avoiding certain environments, surrounding themselves with supportive people, replacing the habit with healthier choices, flows from that deeper belief. When your system is connected to your identity, discipline feels less like willpower and more like self-expression. The problem is that most people design systems around goals instead of identities. They say, I want to run a marathon, so I'll start training. But if they don't see themselves as a runner, every training session feels like a fight. Contrast that with someone who identifies as a runner. Their system doesn't just exist to cross the marathon finish line. It exists because running is part of who they are. The marathon is just a milestone on the path of living out their identity. That's why the second person is more likely to keep running long after the race is over. Their system isn't temporary. It's sustainable because it's tied to their sense of self. When you build systems that match your identity, you also free yourself from comparison. You stop asking, what is everyone else doing? And start asking, what works for me? For example, a creative person might build a system of writing or designing in the evenings when they feel most inspired, rather than forcing themselves into a 5 a.m. routine just because someone else swears by it. A parent with young children might build a system of exercising at home instead of at the gym because their identity includes being present for their family. A student who values curiosity might build a system of studying in small, consistent bursts rather than cramming before exams. The key is that these systems are not designed to impress others. They are designed to support the life you are actually living. Identity-driven systems also tap into intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation, the kind that comes from rewards, recognition, or external validation, runs out quickly. But when a system connects to your identity, it feeds your sense of purpose. If you identify as someone who values growth, then a system of daily reading doesn't feel like a chore. It feels like you're honoring your values. If you identify as someone who values health, then preparing nutritious meals doesn't feel restrictive. It feels like you're taking care of yourself in a way that reflects who you are. This shift is what allows people to stick with their systems long after the initial excitement of the goal has faded. Another powerful aspect of designing systems around identity is that it creates consistency through self-respect. When you act in alignment with your identity, you reinforce trust with yourself. You prove to yourself that your actions match your values. Over time, this builds confidence. Confidence doesn't come from achieving one big goal. It comes from the quiet evidence you collect every day when your actions reflect who you want to be. The runner who runs 3 times a week, the student who studies consistently, the entrepreneur who takes small but focused steps every day. Each is building a system that not only moves them forward, but also strengthens their identity. This is also why systems that are not tied to identity eventually collapse. Imagine someone who sets up a system to go to the gym every morning at 6 a.m. If deep down they don't see themselves as someone who enjoys fitness or values health, that system will eventually feel like a burden. They might push through for a few weeks, maybe even months, but at some point their actions and their identity will clash, and when that clash happens, identity usually wins. You cannot discipline a system that goes against who you believe yourself to be. The only way to sustain it is to shift the identity first and then design the system to support it. The process of building identity-driven systems begins with asking better questions. Instead of asking, what goal do I want to achieve? The more powerful question is, who do I want to become? Do you want to become someone who is strong and healthy? Then design a system of daily movement and nutrition that fits your lifestyle. Do you want to become someone who is financially secure? Then build a system of budgeting, saving, and investing that reflects your values, not just someone else's blueprint. Do you want to become someone who is creative? Then build a system of consistent practice, exploration, and output that keeps creativity alive in your daily life. What's powerful about identity-driven systems is that they outlast specific goals. You might reach your fitness goal, your financial goal, or your career milestone, but the system continues because it is tied to who you are, not just what you wanted. A person who identifies as healthy doesn't stop eating well just because they hit a target weight. A person who identifies as a writer doesn't stop writing just because they finished one book. A person who identifies as a leader doesn't stop leading just because they got a promotion. The system remains, and the system keeps producing new results because it is sustained by identity. When systems are aligned with identity, they also create resilience. Life is unpredictable. Goals can be delayed. Circumstances can change. Setbacks can appear out of nowhere. If your system is purely goal-driven, these disruptions can derail you completely. But if your system is identity-driven, you adapt. If you see yourself as someone who values health, you don't abandon your entire process because you missed one workout. If you see yourself as someone who values discipline, you don't give up because you had one unproductive day. The identity anchors you, and the system gives you a way to return to that identity no matter what happens. When people think about achievement, they often picture big, dramatic efforts. They imagine the breakthrough moment, the one bold leap that changes everything, the grand gesture that catapults them from where they are to where they want to be. But that picture is misleading. Lasting achievement doesn't come from a single action. It comes from a series of small, repeatable actions that accumulate over time. The truth is that extraordinary results are built on ordinary habits practiced consistently. What feels small in the moment grows into something unshakable when it is repeated long enough. The human mind tends to overestimate what can be accomplished in a short time and underestimate what can be accomplished in a long time. That's why people set aggressive goals for the next month, work furiously, burn out, and quit. But they rarely consider what would happen if they just committed to doing something small every day for the next year. Think about someone who wants to write a book. The thought of writing 300 pages feels overwhelming, almost impossible. But writing 1 page a day, that feels manageable. 1 page a day for a year is 365 pages. A finished manuscript? The big dream feels unattainable until you break it down into small, repeatable actions. Small actions matter not because they are dramatic, but because they compound. Compounding is the hidden engine of transformation. Just like money invested wisely grows exponentially over time, Actions invested daily multiply their effect. Reading 10 pages a day might not feel significant, but over a year, it's more than 600 pages, dozens of books, each one expanding your knowledge. Doing 10 push-ups a day might not seem like a workout, but in a year, that's over 600 push-ups, and your body will not be the same. Saving $5 a day might not feel like wealth, but in a year, that's more than $1,800, and over a decade with interest, it grows into something substantial. The power is not in the size of the action, but in the discipline of repetition. The challenge is that small actions don't give immediate gratification. That's why so many people abandon them. If you go to the gym today, you won't wake up tomorrow with a transformed body. If you read a few pages tonight, you won't wake up tomorrow with wisdom pouring out of you. If you save a few dollars, you won't wake up tomorrow financially free. The results are invisible in the short term, which tricks people into thinking the actions don't matter. But the reality is that every repetition is building momentum, even when you can't see it yet. The results arrive suddenly, but they are always the product of accumulated effort. Consider bamboo. For years after planting, it appears as though nothing is happening. Underground, the roots are spreading, creating a foundation strong enough to support rapid growth. Then, almost overnight, the bamboo shoots up, growing feet in just weeks. To the outside observer, it looks like sudden success. But in truth, it was years of unseen growth below the surface that made the explosion possible. Human progress works the same way. The small actions you repeat every day may feel invisible, but they are creating a foundation. And one day, the growth becomes visible, and everyone else calls it sudden success, even though you know it was years of consistent effort. Another reason small, repeatable actions are powerful is that they lower resistance. Big actions feel intimidating, which makes procrastination easy. But small actions feel manageable, which makes starting easier. Once you start, momentum carries you forward. Think about someone trying to build the habit of running. If they tell themselves they need to run 5 miles every day, the resistance will be high, and excuses will come easily. But if they commit to putting on their running shoes and stepping outside for even a few minutes, the resistance drops. Most of the time, they will end up running further once they start. The secret is that small actions remove the barrier of starting, and starting is often the hardest part. These actions also build identity through evidence. Every time you perform a small action, you cast a vote for the kind of person you are becoming. If you write a page, you are a writer. If you practice an instrument for 10 minutes, you are a musician. If you save money, you are someone who takes care of their financial future. Over time, these votes accumulate and your identity solidifies. You don't become a disciplined person by declaring it. You become one by repeatedly showing up in small ways that prove it. It is tempting to believe that only big efforts create meaningful change, but history shows otherwise. The greatest athletes, thinkers, and leaders built their mastery through relentless repetition of the basics. A basketball player doesn't become great by hitting a single winning shot. They become great by shooting thousands of free throws when no one is watching. A musician doesn't become extraordinary by performing one concert. They become extraordinary by practicing scales for hours every day. A leader doesn't become wise by reading one book. They become wise by committing to a lifetime of learning. The extraordinary is always built on the ordinary, done consistently. What makes small, repeatable actions even more powerful is that they create momentum. Momentum is the invisible force that makes progress feel easier over time. At the beginning, the effort feels heavy because you are starting from zero. But each repetition builds a little more momentum, and eventually the system starts carrying you forward. The person who starts saving small amounts of money eventually feels motivated by watching their account grow. The person who starts exercising lightly eventually feels stronger and wants to push further. The person who starts learning daily eventually realizes how much they've grown and becomes hungry for more. Small actions create momentum, and momentum creates transformation. There is a paradox in achievement. The things that look insignificant in the short term are the very things that create significance in the long term. Skipping a workout doesn't seem like a big deal, but skipping consistently changes your health over time. Eating one unhealthy meal doesn't matter, but repeating it every day does. Similarly, reading one page might not feel like progress, but repeating it creates knowledge. Writing one paragraph might feel small, but repeating it produces a book. The compound effect works both ways. It can build you up or tear you down, depending on which small actions you choose. At the heart of it all is the willingness to trust the process, to believe that even when the results are not visible, the actions are working, to commit to the ordinary with the faith that it is leading to the extraordinary. The person who learns to honor small, repeatable actions no longer feels the pressure to achieve everything overnight. They understand that greatness is not in the dramatic gesture, but in the quiet consistency that compounds into something remarkable. One of the most common frustrations people experience when chasing goals is the feeling that they are not making enough progress. They look at the gap between where they are and where they want to be, and the distance feels discouraging. This happens because progress is being measured only by outcomes. If the goal is to lose 20 pounds, they don't feel successful until the scale shows a 20-pound difference. If the goal is to earn a certain amount of money, they don't feel accomplished until the bank account reaches that number. If the goal is to run a marathon, they don't feel like a runner until the finish line is crossed. The problem with this way of measuring is that it discounts every effort made along the way. It creates a binary mindset. Either you've achieved the goal or you haven't, and until then, you're stuck in a state of dissatisfaction. Measuring progress through systems offers a completely different perspective. Instead of asking, "Am I there yet?" the question becomes, "Am I showing up for my system today?" The student who wants to graduate with honors doesn't need to wait until graduation day to feel progress. They can measure success by sticking to their system of studying consistently, attending classes, and completing assignments with focus. The person who wants to get healthier doesn't need to wait until they reach an ideal weight to feel accomplished. They can measure success by showing up for their daily walk, by preparing nourishing meals, by going to bed on time. When you measure progress through systems, every day holds an opportunity for victory. This shift is powerful because it transforms progress from something external and distant into something internal and immediate. It changes progress from an event in the future to a practice in the present. You no longer need to wait months or years to feel like you're growing. You can feel it every time you honor your system. Progress becomes a living, breathing part of your daily life, rather than a prize that hangs on the horizon. Systems also allow you to measure progress in ways that goals never could. A goal measures only the end result, the number on the scale, the money earned, the medal won. A system measures the behaviors, the habits, the repetitions that actually create those results. A writer might set a goal of finishing a novel, but measuring progress only by the number of completed chapters can feel overwhelming. If instead they measure progress by the consistency of their writing sessions, the number of days they sit down at their desk, the number of words they add daily, then progress becomes tangible and motivating. Every writing session becomes a victory regardless of how far the finish line may be. Another advantage of measuring progress through systems is resilience. When progress is tied only to outcomes, any delay feels like failure. If you haven't reached your goal by a certain time, it feels like you've wasted effort. But when progress is measured through systems, delays don't erase your effort because the system itself is the success. Missing a target date doesn't mean you've failed. It simply means you're still in the process. As long as the system continues, progress is still happening. This builds patience, because the focus is no longer on how fast you can get there, but on how consistently you can move forward. Systems also prevent the trap of arrival fallacy, the feeling of emptiness that often comes after achieving a goal. Many people chase goals believing that reaching them will bring lasting happiness. They get the promotion, they lose the weight, they run the race, and then they feel a surprising void. That's because the joy was tied only to the outcome, and once the outcome is reached, there is nothing left to pursue. But when progress is tied to systems, there is no arrival fallacy. The system continues after the milestone. The runner who built a system of consistent training doesn't stop after the marathon. They keep running because it's part of who they are. The entrepreneur who built a system of learning and adapting doesn't stop after one successful product. They keep innovating because the system sustains them. Measuring through systems ensures that the journey itself remains fulfilling, not just the destination. There's also a psychological advantage to systems-based progress. Goals create pressure because they are often outside of your full control. You can control your effort, but you cannot fully control outcomes. Markets change, setbacks happen, timing doesn't always align. Systems bring control back into your hands. You can't guarantee that you'll get the promotion by a specific date, but you can guarantee that you'll improve your skills, take initiative, and add value at work. You can't guarantee you'll hit your target weight in 3 months, but you can guarantee that you'll stick to your daily workouts and nutrition habits. When progress is measured through systems, you regain a sense of agency because success is defined by what you can actually control. Even in the smallest actions, systems create a sense of accomplishment. Imagine someone who sets a goal to save $10,000 in a year. If they only measure progress by that final number, they may feel stuck at $500 as though they've barely made a dent. But if they measure progress by sticking to their savings system, setting aside money each week, cutting unnecessary expenses, they get to celebrate every successful week. Each deposit becomes a win. Over time, those wins build momentum, and momentum builds motivation. By the time the goal is reached, it doesn't feel like a desperate sprint to the finish line, but like the natural outcome of hundreds of small victories. The difference between outcome-based measurement and system-based measurement is the difference between chasing validation and building mastery. Chasing validation means you only feel worthy when you hit the goal. Building mastery means you feel worthy every time you show up and practice your system. The artist who paints every day is already living their identity as an artist, regardless of whether their work is in a gallery. The student who studies with focus daily is already embodying discipline, regardless of whether they've graduated yet. The athlete who trains with consistency is already a competitor, regardless of whether they've won the medal yet. The system itself is proof of progress. When you learn to measure progress through systems, you also learn to see failure differently. A missed goal is no longer the end of the story. It's feedback for the system. If you fall short, it doesn't mean you're incapable. It means your system needs adjusting. This turns failure into data, into something useful rather than something crushing. You're no longer tied to the outcome as a reflection of your worth. Instead, you are tied to the process as a reflection of your growth. Every adjustment strengthens the system, and every repetition makes you better prepared for the next attempt. Ultimately, progress measured through systems builds a deeper sense of fulfillment. Instead of waiting for permission to celebrate, you create daily moments of pride. Instead of chasing fleeting highs at the finish line, you build steady satisfaction from showing up. Instead of wondering when you'll finally arrive, you recognize that you are already progressing because you are honoring your system. And that realization turns the act of growth into something sustainable, meaningful, and lasting. Every dream begins as a spark, but a spark alone cannot light the path to achievement. Goals give us direction. They remind us of what we want and why it matters, but they are not enough on their own. Without systems, goals are fragile, dependent on fleeting motivation, and vulnerable to the distractions of everyday life. Systems transform ambition into structure, and structure into progress. They shift our focus from distant outcomes to present actions, from obsessing over the finish line to mastering the steps along the way. The key is not to copy the routines of others, but to design systems that align with who you are and who you want to become. Identity-driven systems turn discipline into self-expression, allowing your habits to reflect your values rather than fight against them. And when those habits are small, consistent, and repeatable, they compound into something extraordinary. Progress stops being an invisible struggle and becomes something measurable in every choice, every repetition, every day you honor your process. Success, then, is not defined by whether you've arrived at a single milestone, but by whether you're showing up for your system. The real question is not, did I achieve the goal today? But am I living the process that will make the goal inevitable? When you begin to measure progress in this way, you free yourself from the trap of all or nothing thinking. You discover that growth is not reserved for the future. It's happening here and now, in the systems you build, the habits you sustain, and the identity you reinforce every single day.